When I finished recording yesterday, I had established how the oil gets out to the various locations that need lubrication. And at that point, I frankly had not quite figured out how it gets back to the sump from the heads. And came out this morning and looked a little bit, and all of a sudden it was pretty obvious. So right now I've got one half of a case set up in the orientation of a flat six engine, and I've got the cylinder head set up in the orientation of a flathead engine. And it's actually pretty obvious. This is down, and there's a little shelf that runs across at an angle on the bottom of the head, and then it dumps into this opening. And that opening, where the timing chains come up, communicates directly through the head, the block, and pops out here on the other side into the vicinity of where the oil can then run down to the pan or the sump. Doesn't have a pan, it's got a sump. So actually that pretty much explains how the oil gets back from the head. There is a large pathway for that to occur. It gets back to the sump. Okay, I've got an update on the story of how the oil gets out of a cylinder head that's maybe downhill and got G-forces from cornering fighting against it. Brandon Clark at Slacker Racing Development kind of clued me in a little bit, and I've been able to figure it out, I believe. So there are two secondary oil pumps, and I think in general people would call them scavenge pumps. Here's one. Here's the other. The difference is this one is a dual oil pump and vacuum pump. And the vacuum it's the source of the vacuum for your power brakes. So we'll pick up the one that's a little easier to see. It's got a tab on the end that spins. And you can't see much down in there, but there's an opening at the bottom. There's another opening at the top. And this fits this square tab, engages a square hole, rectangular hole at the end of the exhaust camshaft. So it's driven by the exhaust camshaft, which means that it's going to live on the cylinder head in that spot right there. So that is down at the end. I was talking about the pump, the scavenge pump that mounts in this area on the head. When I turn over to look at the head cover, I see that there's a casting with a hole at the very lowest point where the oil would go to. And if we spray our solvent in there, it comes out up here. So that answers the question. And the very lowest point where the oil would get to, even under G conditions, that's where the scavenge pump is drawing from. So yeah, just wanted to throw that in. So there's a passageway down at the bottom. I'm pretty sure when I look at the head cover, there's a mating passageway. And if I tip the head up, and spray solvent in a hole here, which we'll come back to, it comes out. So this port communicates, and you can kind of see the casting lines. It communicates up through here, and then it goes across, and then it shoots down, and there's a hole right here. Now that's a kind of an easy signature spot on the cylinder head. It's in the cutout for the timing chain. So if we jump over here to the cylinder head and identify the hole for the timing chain, the big hole for the timing chain, up here is a hole that matches that hole down there when you assemble the head on the car. And it shoots down through here, down, 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 down through here, and it pops out right there. You can actually see the daylight in the background. Then this sees a labyrinth path that goes over and just kind of dies out in the middle of the car. We will come back to that in just a second. On the other mating half, it's basically the same story in reverse. I would go find the opening for the timing chain. It pops out, there's a labyrinth path that comes across, and it comes to a dead end. So what happens, there's two scavenge pumps. This labyrinth, when you pull the two case parts together, matches up with that labyrinth. And this labyrinth matches up with that labyrinth. So each one of those labyrinths has an exit, and it's right here and right there. And that gets covered up by the tube. Now remember, the sump is upside down as I'm filming, so that oil goes back upward and is basically expelled into the upper part of the sump. And that's where that oil reaches the sump and rejoins to be recirculated again. Now, Brandon seems to think this may be also a de-aeration device, and I don't know. I mean, it pops the oil out into sort of the fog of oil and air that exists in the bottom of any engine. And I believe, the idea is the heavy drops fall to the bottom, and the oily fluid at some point becomes oily air, which becomes a vapor that reaches your air oil separator, and that's the final place. But you definitely do not want air in the oil that's being sucked by the pickup, because oil with air in it doesn't lubricate as well as pure oil. Pretty basic science. So I can't guess as to all the details of what Porsche did, but in general, this returns oil from a cylinder head that may be downhill and seeing lateral G's, and it pumps the oil or scavenges it and brings it back up. Eventually dumps it into sump. So there you go. That's that part of the story.